I'm in Nepal for a workshop here today that is being hosted by CS in collaboration with the University of Cambridge, the University of Southampton, UNEP WCMC, and our collaborators also in Brazil, IIS. The aims of the workshop here are to try and see the way in which we might be able to do something like this in Nepal. We've been working in Brazil to try and see whether it's possible to develop a framework that allows us to link data that have been used to estimate poverty indices and link those with environmental dimensions. And a key question is that something that would be of interest and relevant to the Nepali context? Traditionally, poverty has been often linked to measures of household income and consumption, and that I think continues to be the case for many countries, and I think that's also reflected in the World Bank's poverty line. But I think that there's been conceptual advances in the way that we think about poverty more general. And I think that is exemplified by the work on the Human Development Index and more recently by the work that OFI at Oxford has been doing to try and develop the Multidimensional Poverty Index. I think the key challenge is to continue to expand that and to think about different ways in which the environment can play a role in the way that we think about poverty and well-being more generally.
I think there are a number of other contexts which are also beyond the numeric value of money, which helps to reduce the poverty, the environmentally friendly goods, and which helps in a sustainable way. Just one other example in terms of the way the Sustainable Development Goals are developed, where the environmental factor has been integrated in most of its goal. That already justifies how important the environmental value are in terms of poverty reduction.
We have a good understanding and I think general agreement that the environment is inherently linked to human well-being. There's two ways of thinking about the way that the environment is linked to well-being. One of them is relatively direct. So the idea is that the environment provides some kind of instrumental pathway towards or that would influence well-being. So an example of that would be, how changes in climate are influencing agricultural production and how that agricultural production might influence income. So there's a direct pathway between an environmental aspect, climate. It's linked to income sources and how those then influence well-being at the household level or at the country level. A second way of thinking about this is that the environment has or can be thought of as being an inherent component of well-being. And so one way of conceptualizing that is that it is a constitutive element. It is linked directly to the way that people feel or conceive their own well-being. So an example would be the way in which, for example, an increase in the likelihood of droughts or floods might affect people's levels of anxiety or stress or vulnerability. So the link there is much more central, a link that is indirect and instrumental in that sense.
I think there is high need of addressing the environmentally adjusted indicators while finalizing the multidimensional poverty index. But while doing that, I think we need to take care of the contextual reality of the country. So this thing is necessary. This thing is also possible provided we are able to adjust these indicators in our context, and provided there is a necessary localization of all these indicators in our context.
The challenge is to really be context specific, and at the same time try and understand whether there's some universal relationship that we can conceive of, and that has broader traction, both within a kind of academic context, but also a policy context. Essentially, one of the key aims of the work that we're doing is to try and make something that is policy relevant and that ultimately allows us to make valuable contributions to sustainable development more generally.
अब एयर पोल्युसन भन्दिनु भयो भने त अब सारा काठमाडौँ भ्यालीलाई एउटै हरेक हाउसहोल्डको एउटै एयर पोल्युसन हो, साझा भयो। त्यसैले कुन प्राइभेट गुड हो, कुन पब्लिक गुड हो, त्यो बुझ्नुपर्छ। गरिबी, मेरो घरमा बत्ती नआएको कुरा त व्यक्ति र त्यो हाउसहोल्डले थाहा पाउँछ नि। एयर पोल्युसनलाई घर छिमेक र दुईटाको फरक हुन्छ र हुँदैन। बिहानै यो फेल खाने अवस्था आउन सक्छ।
I think we're still at a relatively early part of this thought process about the way in which we think about environment and well-being links. So I think there's some work that needs to be done to try and develop these frameworks a little bit more. And the second part is how do we transform that conceptual framework into a metric that can be measured and that can provide some indicator that combines estimates of poverty and well-being with this environmental dimension. And there, the limitations are, I think, predominantly linked to the availability of data and the way in which the conceptual framework maps on with the data that we have available. The plan for the future is to try and continue to think about this. And we would be thrilled to be able to collaborate with partners in Nepal to try and develop and gain a greater understanding of how such relationships can be thought of, conceived of in the Nepali context, and the way that we could develop a broader environmentally adjusted poverty index for Nepal. We've been doing some work in Brazil to try and think of that and to understand or produce several potential examples of how that could be done in practice. So this is still very much a project and a concept in development.